Friedrich Nietzsche was a philosopher of radical ideas, an ardent critic of weakness, pity, and dependency. Known for his magnanimous philosophy that celebrated strength, vitality, and the will to power, Nietzsche championed a vision of life that demanded risk, self-overcoming, and a willingness to live dangerously. But behind this towering intellectual legacy lies a tragic story, one of physical and mental collapse, of dependency and frailty that stands in sharp contrast to the ideals he espoused. The invalid is a parasite on society. In a certain state, it is indecent to go on living, to vegetate on in cowardly dependence on physicians and medicinaments after the meaning of life, the right to life, has been lost, ought to entail the profound contempt of society. To create a new responsibility, that of the physician, in all cases in which the highest interest of life, of ascending life, demands the most ruthless suppression and sequestration of degenerating life. For example, in determining the right to reproduce, the right to be born, the right to love. To die proudly when it is no longer possible to live proudly, death at one's own free choice, death at the proper time, with a clear head and with joyfulness, consummated in the midst of children and witnesses, so that an actual leave-taking is possible, while he who is living is still there. Likewise, an actual evaluation of what has been desired and what achieved in life, an adding up of life. All of this in contrast to the pitiable and horrible comedy Christianity has made of the hour of death. One should never forget of Christianity that it has abused the weakness of the dying to commit conscience rape and even the mode of death to formulate value judgments on men and the past. From love of life, one ought to desire to die differently. From this, freely, consciously, not accidentally, not suddenly overtaken. We have no power to prevent ourselves from being born, but we can rectify this error, for it is sometimes an error. When one does away with oneself, one does the most estimable thing possible. One thereby almost deserves to live. One has freed others from having to endure one's sight. One has removed an objection from life. Despite these convictions, Nietzsche's own life would take a tragic turn. In January of 1889, while residing in Turin, Italy, Nietzsche experienced a catastrophic mental collapse. According to legend, he witnessed a coachman brutally whipping a horse in the Piazza Carlo Alberto. Overcome with emotion, Nietzsche is said to have run to the horse, embraced it, and then collapsed, marking the onset of his mental breakdown. While evocative, this story mirrors a scene from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and scholars debate whether it truly happened or was embellished over time. Following this episode, Nietzsche began writing the so-called madness letters, signing them with names like Dionysus or the Crucified, reflecting his fractured state of mind. Concerned friends, including Franz Overbeck, intervened and arranged for his hospitalization. He was transferred to psychiatric clinics in Basel and Jena, where he was treated but never recovered his faculties. During this period of helplessness, Nietzsche fell under the care of his mother, Franziska, and later his sister, Elizabeth. Their relationships were fraught with tension. Nietzsche's disdain for them is revealed in one of his letters where he wrote, "Whenever I see the deepest contrast to me, the incalculable baseness of the instincts, I always find my mother and sister. To believe that I am related to such riffraff would be a blasphemy against my divinity. The treatment I have experienced at the hands of my mother and sister up until this very moment introduces in me unspeakable horror. Here, there is at work a perfect hell machine that with impeccable accuracy picks the very moment at which it can inflict a bloody wound at my highest moments. Since then, every power is lacking to defend oneself against such a poisonous worm. The physiological contiguity makes possible such a pre-established disharmony, but I confess that the deepest objection to the eternal recurrence, my most terrible thought, is always my mother and my sister. This visceral contempt reflects Nietzsche's sense of alienation and estrangement, even from those closest to him. Yet despite this bitterness, he became entirely dependent on their care during his years of decline. In 1890, Nietzsche's mother brought him back to her home in Nuremberg, where she cared for him until her death in 1897. Afterward, his sister Elizabeth assumed responsibility and moved him to Weimar. Elizabeth, however, would later manipulate Nietzsche's work, shaping his legacy to suit her ideological interests. Nietzsche spent the last decade of his life in a vegetative state, physically alive but mentally unreachable. He died on August 25, 1900, at the age of 55. Leaving behind a legacy as controversial as it was influential.